Evil, gang, is a no thing. Watch this. One of these atheistic Marxist professors that loves to eat Christians for lunch, the story is told, was before his class and said, "Did God create everything?" And some brave student said, in this very Darwinistic environment, "Yeah." "Perfect," the prof said. "Let me ask you a question. Is there evil?" "Yeah, there's evil." Well, the prof said, "Okay, if God created everything, then God created evil since evil exists. And according to the principle that our works define who we are, then God is evil." And so there was silence in the room. And the professor was quite pleased with himself that he had silenced this young, naive freshman. But then another freshman raised their hand, one that had thought through this, and said this, "Prof, let me ask you a question. Do you believe in cold?" And the prof said, "What kind of question is that? Of course I believe in cold. Who thinks cold doesn't exist? What kind of question is this?" The young man replied, "In fact, sir, cold does not exist. According to the laws of physics, what we consider cold is in reality the absence of heat. Everybody and every object is susceptible to study when it has or transmits energy. And heat is what makes a body or matter have or transmit energy. Absolute zero, or 460 degrees negative Fahrenheit, is the total absence of heat. All matter becomes inert and incapable of reaction at that temperature. Cold does not exist. We have created the word cold to describe how we feel if we have too little heat." "Prof, let me ask you another question. Does darkness exist?" "Of course it does," the prof said. The student replied, "No, once again, no, you're wrong, sir. Darkness does not exist either. Darkness is in reality simply the absence of light. Light we can study, but not darkness. In fact, we can use Newton's prism to break white light into many colors and study the various wavelengths of each color. You cannot measure darkness, sir. A simple ray of light can break into a world of darkness and illuminate it. How can you know how dark a certain space is? You know how dark it is by measuring the amount of light present. Isn't that correct? Darkness is a term used by man to describe what happens when there is no light. So, sir, let me ask you a question. Does evil exist?" The professor said, "Look, I already said that evil exists. Of course it exists. We see it all the time, all throughout humanity. It's in the multitude of crime and violence everywhere in the world. These manifestations are nothing but evil." To this, the student replied, "Look, evil does not exist, sir, or at least it does not exist unto itself. Evil is simply the absence of God. It is just like darkness and cold, a word that man has created to describe the absence of God. God did not create evil. Evil is not like faith or love that existed long ago, just as faith and love existed and light and heat existed. Evil is the result of what happens when man does not have God's love present in his heart. It is like the cold that comes when there is no heat, or the darkness that comes when there is no light." So, Prof, you sit down. Now look, that story has been around as a teaching tool for a long time. Some well-meaning believers have said that was Newton. That was Einstein. He was the student, and they forwarded it to all their friends in some impressive way. It was not Einstein. And you won't look like an Einstein, and you'll lose your authority if you just forward stuff mindlessly. But the truth in that story, okay? The truth in that story stands. What I want to say to you is evil is the absence of what should be. Now let's go back and look at this again. So we don't want to say that evil is something. What we'll say is, no, evil is the absence of good. Evil is what happens when man leaves God. Evil is where we go without God. That's why God takes us. Guess what it says in Colossians chapter 1, verses 12 and 13? He has brought us out of darkness into light. He has brought us out of where we went without God, the absence of light. God said, "I am light. The absence of me is darkness. You want back into light? Come back to me. You live in chaos and evil. Why? Because you have left me. Come back to me." So, here's another little syllogism. Every creature God made is perfect. Then you will go on to say, perfect creatures cannot do what is imperfect. Therefore, every creature must only act perfectly. By the way, James chapter 1, verse 17 says, every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above. So we would say every creature God made is perfect. But if every creature he made is perfect, perfect creatures can't do what's imperfect, they say. Therefore, every creature must only act perfectly. The problem with this is in the second premise. Perfect creatures, in order to be perfect, you've got to love. In order to be able to love, you can't be, as Einstein said, a wind-up toy. If part of perfection is the ability to love, to give yourself to somebody else, you can't be a robot. And in order to love, you must be able to choose. In other words, one guy said it this way, but rather philosophically, money can buy you a real good dog, but it cannot buy you the wag of its tail. Or, absolute power can make you obey, but it cannot make you love. God is not a rapist, he is a lover, and he created us to love him, so he gave us the ability to choose. He revealed himself in all his perfection and glory, and we chose not to love him. Perfect creatures have the ability to love, therefore they have the ability to choose, and when we chose not to love light, guess what we bought into? Darkness. When we chose not to embrace good, guess what we became? Evil. So, let's look at this one more time. God made everything perfect. One perfect thing God made is free creatures. Free creatures, freedom allows for the choice of evil. Therefore, imperfection can arise out of perfection. See Genesis 3.